Hello students, this is the central nervous system brought to you by Simple Biology. Please subscribe to the channel to get new videos, like and share. The central nervous system is divided into two main parts, the brain and the spinal cord. The brain has three major parts, the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brain stem. The cerebrum, it's made up of the two hemispheres. The main parts of the cerebrum are the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. And the cerebrum just underneath, in addition to the brainstem here. So these are the three major parts: cerebrum, brainstem, and cerebellum. The cerebral cortex, it's the outer layer of the brain. It's the outer layer of the brain. It's organized into two hemispheres and is composed of the four lobes. This cerebral cortex is 1 to 3 millimeter thick. It is made up of gray matter, where are the cell bodies of neurons there. Underneath we have the white matter, which is underneath the cerebral cortex. In the white matter you will find the axons, it's the brain medulla. The cerebral cortex, as we said, it's made up of four lobes. The frontal lobe controls motor activity and tasks associated with dopamine system, memory, attention, problem solving, speech production. The parietal lobe is mostly dealing with touch sensation and spatial navigation as well. The temporal lobe is mainly processing auditory impulses, language comprehension, and memory information, hearing center. Also, the occipital lobe, it's the sight perception structure or part of the brain. It's responsible for sight perception and it has the visual cortex. The cerebellum appears as a separate structure at the base of the brain underneath the cerebral hemispheres. It is responsible for coordinating unconscious motor functions such as balance and movement coordination. The brainstem, the brainstem is the posterior part of the brain that connects the spinal cord with relays signals to and from the body. So the brain and the spinal cord are connected through the brainstem. The brainstem includes the bones, the medulla oblongata, often referred to as the medulla, and the midbrain. So the brainstem, it's made up of three parts: medulla oblongata, bones, and midbrain. The brainstem via the medulla controls automatic and involuntary activities like breathing, swallowing, heart rate, etc. So the brainstem controls the involuntary responses because, as we know before, the medulla oblongata has the cardiovascular center and the breathing center. So it is responsible for controlling involuntary responses. That's if you look at the general structure of the brain. So we have the cerebral hemispheres. Also in the brain, we have this structure, hypothalamus, and we have the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus is the region of the brain that functions as the interface of the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus functions to maintain homeostasis. So the main function of hypothalamus is to maintain homeostasis. How does it do this? Via the coordination of the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the hypothalamus also produces some hormones directly, which are secreted via the posterior pituitary gland. So it secretes some hormones and they are stored in the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland will release them when needed. So the hypothalamus is known to control thirst, respond to thirst, hunger, and thermoregulation center in the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland, which just underneath the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, this pituitary gland is considered the master gland. It produces hormones that regulate other glands and target organs. These hormones are called tropic hormones. The anterior lobe of the pituitary gland is called the adenohypophysis and secretes hormones such as FSH, LH, and growth hormones. Also, prolactin is secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. The posterior lobe secretes hormones such as ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin, the hormone of pleasure. We still have here the corpus callosum. So what is the function of the corpus callosum at the base of the hemispheres? Technically, this corpus callosum is connecting left and right hemispheres. So what are left and right hemispheres? This is a real image of the brain. And in the brain here, you can see the fissure between the left and right hemispheres. So what kind of functions are controlled in each part? It is well known that the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. But other than this, all the logic and language and critical thinking and reasoning takes place in the cerebral cortex of the left hemisphere, and all the creativity and imagination and intuition, all of these are controlled by the right hemisphere, the cerebral cortex of the right hemisphere. So the left hemisphere controls the language and the logic and critical thinking and reasoning, and receives impulses from the right side of the body, and the opposite here receive impulses from the left side of the body and uh, respond to or controls creativity and imagination, etc. So as we said before, the left and the right hemispheres are connected through the corpus callosum. So what is this corpus callosum? It is a bundle of nerve fibers that connects the two cerebral hemispheres. It is the largest white matter structure in the brain, so it's mainly white matter, consisting of roughly 250 million axon projections. So any damage to the corpus callosum can prevent information exchange between the left and the right hemispheres and split brain disorders. So again, this is the corpus callosum in a different cross-section image. We move from now to the reflexes, or to the other part, sorry, the other part of the brain. The other part of the brain here, again, it's not the other part of the brain, it's the other part of the central nervous system. It's the spinal cord. So the spinal cord has opposite things. In the spinal cord, we have the white matter outside. So this will be the white matter, and the gray matter will be inside, opposite to the brain. The cerebral cortex is gray matter, and the cerebral medulla is white matter. Here is opposite. In the gray matter, we have interneurons. One of the main functions of the spinal cord is to connect the body with the brain, and vice versa. So the afferent sensory messages, they enter the spinal cord and leave from the ventral root. So they enter from the dorsal root and leave from the ventral root. So the message which is entering into the spinal cord is called afferent, and one which is leaving is called efferent. Spinal reflex. Spinal reflex, it's an involuntary, fast, protective process. So a message is detected by receptors in the skin, like in this example. It goes through by the sensory nerve, spinal ganglion, afferent into the spinal cord, into the gray matter. We have interneuron, then directly motor neuron, efferent to the muscles. So it's called reflex arc as well. In this reflex arc or spinal reflex, the brain is not involved at all. It's involuntary and without thinking. This process is protective method, and it is very fast. So again, we have sensory neuron, interneuron, motor neuron only. Another type of reflex is the cranial reflex. The cranial reflex, it receives messages from the skull, from the head. Like in the cranial reflex, we have examples like eye blinking, yawning, sneezing, coughing, pupil reflex, tearing, and breathing. Pupil reflex, like how the pupil responds to the change in light intensity. So if bright light falling on the eyes, the response is contraction of circular muscles in the iris, which reduces the pupil size. And again, this is a survival value. It's like any reflex, like the spinal reflex or the cranial reflex, both are survival reflexes. So they allow us to respond very fast, involuntarily, to protect ourselves against like an instant danger.